Professor Nam-Yong Lee's long commentary, Diagnosis and Prescription for Coupang's Data Disaster, Affecting 34 Million People. The essence of the incident, a breach affecting 3 out of 4 citizens. Hello, this is Nam-Yong Lee on Professor Lee TV. The recent Coupang data leak is not a simple hacking incident. It is a massive livelihood disaster in which the home addresses, phone numbers, email accounts, and order histories of roughly 3 out of 4 Korean citizens may have been dumped wholesale onto criminal markets. Out of a national population of about 51 million, between 33 and 34 million user accounts were compromised. In practical terms, that means most adult citizens have been exposed at least once. This is not just an IT news story. It is a systemic crisis that shakes both ordinary people's livelihoods and the credibility of Korea's digital state. The key question is no longer who made a one-time mistake, but rather, how could information on this scale quietly leak out over a period of several months? And why is the cost of that failure being concentrated on the most vulnerable ordinary citizens? In this commentary, I will look at how the breach happened, how long it continued, and what we know about the attacker, then compare the limits of Korea's Personal Information Protection Act with the US Privacy Act, and finally, from the perspective of relational philosophy, coolly examine the responsibilities of each stakeholder group, scale and duration of the leak, a mega breach, running 147 days. According to what has been disclosed so far, the breach began around June 24, 2025, and unauthorized access was not detected until November 18th, 19th. For roughly 5 months, 147 days in calendar terms, the attacker appears to have resided inside Coupang's systems, quietly siphoning personal data. During that entire period, internal security monitoring and anomaly detection systems effectively failed to function. That alone is a signal that alarm systems have broken down, not only in a single company, but across Korea's digital economy. The exposed data include names, email addresses, mobile phone numbers, delivery addresses, recipient information, and portions of order histories. We are told that bank account numbers and passwords were not leaked, but the real-world risk is far greater than that sounds. When a person's lifetime patterns of consumption, addresses and contact details are exposed all at once, he or she can become a target of sophisticated SMS phishing, voice phishing, and even physical crimes for 10 years or more. This is not a one-off incident that ends when the breach stops. It is as if a long-term risk bond has been issued and forced upon ordinary citizens. Method of the breach and attacker profile, a mix of insider knowledge and authentication weaknesses. Judging from what has come to light so far, this was not a simple external hack. It is closer to an insider-driven attack in which 3 factors combined: abandoned authentication keys belonging to a former employee, structural weaknesses in the authentication system, and a slow, low-profile method of harvesting data. The signing keys for access tokens used by a departed employee were apparently not properly revoked or rotated. The attacker seems to have used those keys to masquerade as a legitimate internal system when connecting to Coupang's servers. That implies a total breakdown in access revocation for ex-employees, key management, and the linkage between human resources and security controls. The attacker also used proxy servers to rotate IP addresses and scraped data slowly instead of in large bursts, slipping past anomaly detection in the monitoring systems. That style of attack is difficult to carry out without insider-level knowledge of the system architecture and authentication mechanisms, knowledge at the level of a developer or authentication engineer. We should therefore understand this not merely as the malice of a single hacker, but as a complex incident created by the combination of weak internal controls and architectural vulnerabilities. Precisely for that reason, we cannot stop at one individual's crime. We must also ask about the criminal environment created by organizational and systemic failures, direct harm to ordinary people, a triple risk of fraud, safety and finance. First, phishing attacks via SMS and phone calls will become more sophisticated. Criminals will no longer address you only as dear customer. They will know your actual name, your real phone number, your actual delivery address, and can even say things like, "You recently ordered product XX, correct?" With this level of detail, most ordinary people will think, "This must really be Coupang," and believe the message. Elderly people, low-income earners, and those with limited financial literacy will be especially vulnerable to scams that use compensation, refunds, or payment errors as bait. For someone whose monthly living expenses hinge on 50,000 or 100,000 won, such fraud is not just a financial loss. It is a direct hit that can collapse an entire month's livelihood. Second, the exposure of addresses and lifestyle patterns is a direct threat to physical and household safety. Survivors of domestic violence and stalking, single women living alone, elderly households, and families where people are often away due to night shifts, delivery work, or part-time jobs can all be put at risk. From parcel delivery patterns and receipt times, criminals may infer, at this time of day, nobody is home. This creates a very dangerous environment for burglaries, robberies, and stalking crimes disguised as parcel deliveries. Third, when names, phone numbers, email accounts, and addresses are leaked as a package, it becomes much easier for criminals to impersonate account holders when calling telecoms, banks, and portal call centers to reset passwords or intercept one-time verification codes. As a result, ordinary citizens are forced to bear additional costs in time, effort, and anxiety, changing mobile numbers, resetting passwords across multiple services, and activating various notification and security settings. Indirect economic impact. The retreat of digital convenience hits the poor the hardest. The poorer you are, the more you tend to rely on online platforms such as Coupang. They let you buy goods at slightly lower prices and save precious time after work that would otherwise be spent grocery shopping. They allow people juggling childcare, elder care, and self-employment to maintain daily life with a few clicks. But when fear of online payments and orders grows after an incident like this, people will once again have to spend time traveling to offline markets and supermarkets, bearing the costs of transportation and regional price differences. As the promised dividends of the digital economy, time savings and cost reductions, shrink, people must spend more time and money to fill that gap. The paradoxical costs of this retreat fall most heavily on ordinary citizens, whose living expenses already account for a large share of their income. This incident is also expected to push not only Coupang, but the broader retail, financial, and telecom sectors toward hiring more security personnel, reinforcing security solutions, and paying higher cyber insurance premiums. In a capitalist system, these additional costs are ultimately baked into product prices, fees, and service charges, and passed on to consumers. Large corporations and high-income households can absorb such increases more easily, but low-income citizens will be shaken far more by the same price hike. Moreover, if fines and punitive damages fail to adequately compensate victims and are instead passed back to them in the long run through higher prices and fees, the economic impact on people's livelihoods will not end as a short-term news cycle. It is likely to persist for years. Limits of Korea's Personal Information Protection Law. World-class law, worst-case reality. Korea's Personal Information Protection Act is a strong, comprehensive statute covering both public and private sectors. It allows fines based on a percentage of sales revenue and sets a relatively high cap on statutory damages per person. It has even been called one of the strictest privacy laws in the world. The Independent Personal Information Protection Commission conducts investigations, issues corrective orders and sanctions, and mandates reporting and notification in the event of large-scale breaches. On paper, the framework appears to be robust. In reality, however, major leaks continue to occur at telecom companies, financial institutions, portals, retailers, and now Coupang. This contradiction reveals a system where the law is harsh on its face, but still weak at pre-incident inspection, structural reform, transparency, and effective redress. In particular, concrete technical and administrative standards, such as immediate revocation of ex-employees' keys, strict key management, and sophisticated detection of insider anomalies, remain at the level of recommendations or are treated as box-checking exercises in audits and certifications. That is a fatal weakness. As a result, the Personal Information Protection Act may be a law that hits hard after the fact, but it has not yet become a law that restructures systems in advance and prevents the incidents themselves. Comparison with the US Privacy Act. Lessons in structural design. The US Privacy Act primarily governs personal information held by federal government agencies. It is a public sector law, but it offers a useful mirror through which to critically view Korea's legal framework. First, the Privacy Act requires agencies that maintain systems of records containing personally identifiable information to publish notices describing the purpose, content, use, and disclosure of those systems. In effect, each database must carry a tag listing its name, purpose, scope of use, and categories of third-party disclosures. This makes it easier for the public, Congress, and the media to track the existence and use of particular databases. When violations occur, they can be judged against what was originally disclosed and what changed. Second, the Privacy Act requires agencies to maintain an accounting of disclosures, a record of when, why, and to whom personal information is released. Such accounting records become critical when individuals seek to access, correct, or litigate over their data. They also motivate agencies to strengthen logging and access controls in order to reduce the risk of unauthorized disclosures. Korea's Personal Information Protection Act does impose obligations to retain access logs, but for large private sector platforms, users rarely experience anything like system-by-system public notices, detailed disclosure accounting, or powerful access and correction rights in practice. In terms of the literal strength of legal provisions, Korea's law may look tougher. But in the design of database-level transparency, disclosure accounting, and practical access and correction rights, we should actively consider adopting and strengthening the structural devices found in the Privacy Act for the realm of private platforms. Stakeholders and responsibility through the lens of relational philosophy, hackers, corporations, state, and citizens. From the standpoint of relational philosophy, this incident is not a simple binary conflict of hacker versus Coupang. It is a failure of an entire web of relationships among multiple groups. The first node in this web is the insider attacker, the former employee who is also the prime suspect. If he or she exploited authentication keys to unlawfully access and copy data on tens of millions of people over several months, that constitutes a serious crime under criminal law and privacy law, as well as a betrayal that simultaneously harms tens of millions of ordinary citizens and the organization that once employed him or her. This is the most direct locus of moral responsibility. The second node consists of Coupang's top management and security leadership, the abandonment of ex-employee keys, poor key management, monitoring and detection failures, and clumsy apologies and communication are all issues of structural design and governance. When a platform node that monopolizes the addresses, contact details, and consumption patterns of tens of millions of citizens repeats such rudimentary mistakes, its ethical responsibility is extremely heavy, above and beyond any legal sanctions. The third node comprises regulatory bodies and lawmakers, the Personal Information Protection Commission, the supervising ministries, and the National Assembly. They already possess strong legal and sanctioning powers, yet large-scale breaches continue. They must honestly confront this reality. Were audits and inspections overly formalistic? Did they send a sufficiently clear signal that skimping on security costs will ultimately cost more in fines and lawsuits? They must reflect on these questions. The fourth node is ordinary citizens and consumers. They are the weakest nodes in the data ecosystem, yet are forced to bear the defensive costs themselves, changing phone numbers, resetting passwords, tightening banking and telecom security, and joining class actions. From a relational standpoint, the state, corporations, and regulators must design laws, institutions, and technical architectures around this weakest node. The ultimate criterion for evaluating this incident should be: to what extent will ordinary citizens be less exposed and suffer less in the future? Structural reform to prevent recurrence, mandatory private sector IT audits, and disclosure of service levels. To prevent a repeat of this disaster, several points must now be made crystal clear. First, all information systems that provide business services in the private sector should be subject to legally mandated compulsory audits, both at the development stage and during operation. Up to now, IT system audits have focused mainly on public sector systems, but large platforms that handle deliveries, payments, and online services for tens of millions of customers are, in practice, no different from public infrastructure. For such massive private IT services, independent third-party audits should be conducted periodically from the design phase through to daily operations, and the results must be reported to regulators and disclosed to the public. Second, large-scale IT service companies with a broad customer base should be required, much like financial institutions, to publicly disclose the levels of availability, capacity, security, and continuity they commit to provide. They should clearly state what level of downtime they are designing for, what scale of attack they can withstand, and what recovery timelines they will follow in the event of an incident. These basic service levels should be published so that, when something goes wrong, citizens can verify whether those commitments were honored. Only then will companies prioritize safe and stable long-term operation over cheap and fast development. This data breach is a security failure that has simultaneously endangered the lives and safety of 34 million citizens. It is an inexcusable incident born of ignorance and incompetence. The parties involved must bear both civil and criminal responsibility. The insider attacker must be pursued to the end and criminally punished. Coupang's executives, board members, and security officers must face fines and compensation claims, and where appropriate, disqualification and even criminal liability should be considered. At the same time, regulators and the legislature must also reflect on their failure to design a system that allowed such an incident to occur, and respond by enacting strong measures: mandatory IT audits in the private sector, mandatory disclosure of service levels, and strengthening of class action mechanisms. In relational philosophical terms, this is the only way to treat ordinary citizens not as the weakest, most expendable links, but as the nodes that deserve protection first. I believe this is the starting point for transforming Korea from a country where ordinary citizens have their data stolen at least 3 times into a country where ordinary citizens are no longer routinely exposed. Thank you for watching Professor Nam Yong Lee's long commentary.